We're with Deputy Public Defender Scott Murray, a return guest on 707. Thanks for being back.
Well, thanks for having me back.
You know, our last chat was so, well, it got so big so fast. We covered so much material.
Yeah.
You have a really interesting biography, of course, and viewers can go back and watch that on YouTube if they want to check that out at youtube.com/CMedia Labs. Find the 707 tab. But today we wanted to kind of revisit some of the subjects, and one of them was where you're currently posted as a deputy public defender, working with juvenile defendants.
Yes.
at Juvenile Hall.
Out at Los Guilicos, yeah.
So the transition from where you began your career, which again you can see on YouTube, and where you are now, how did that appointment occur?
I actually asked for it. It was something that I had some interest in, and I'd been downtown working with the adults for roughly 15 years or
right.
so, and it just, you know, I knew some folks that had worked out there, and it just seemed like a really interesting. I don't want to say diversion, but at
Sure.
least a different branch of the system, of the of the criminal justice system.
And it's a very distinct system. Its procedures and protocols are much different than
That's absolutely right. I mean, kids that are arrested and are actually charged have all the rights that an adult does. And one of the things that kind of strikes me as odd, and it never occurred to me before I was working out there, is that in the schools, in the local schools, they don't teach government until senior year.
Right.
When they're almost not juveniles anymore.
Right.
And so the part of the job, obviously, and it's true in the adult system too, is to sit down and discuss your rights, talk about what the process is, what's going to happen next. You know, everybody's a little bit on edge, whether they be adult or kids.
Right, and you're sort of an educator in that moment.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I bring up the point about a lot of these kids not having had the government class yet. Their only real knowledge of procedure, or what a trial even is, what does it mean that you have the right to remain silent, all those kind of things. They only know it from TV.
Yeah, no, it's the media.
And there are an awful lot of cop and lawyer shows and a lot of ways to learn it, but it's, you know, the nitty gritty, getting down to exactly what it means for this particular kid, takes a while to give them that information.
What kind of situations are bringing kids to this point in their lives?
Well, what you find out is that, first of all, the system works differently than the adult system in terms of focus.
Right.
I mean, it's a bit of a generalization, but for the adult system, generally, it's about punishment.
Versus perhaps rehabilitating.
There certainly are rehabilitative programs for the adults. There's no question about that. But the difference is for the kids, based on the fact that their brains haven't really fully matured yet. I mean, the frontal lobe that gives you all the executive functioning and decision making and more detailed type of thought processes, it's not fully formed until you're 25.
My girlfriend says 40, but okay, yeah.
Okay, well, yeah.
But I hear you. That's a real thing. So
yes, it is.
So there's a philosophical, just to begin with.
And that's the idea.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody jokes about teenagers making bad decisions, or, oh, I've got a teenager at home, you know. Well, part of that is just the maturing process. And so by nature and by statute, the juvenile system has to be based on rehabilitation and not punishment. In fact, if a kid is actually in juvenile hall, there has to be an accompanying rehabilitative purpose for it.
Okay.
It's not just for punishment.
But so what are they doing to get in juvenile hall? I mean, what kind of crimes are we seeing?
Right, and so that's why I wanted to start with that premise, because decision making and how they go about getting into the system has a lot to do with the lack of their brain being there. Drugs, certainly.
Okay.
There's probably more marijuana-related cases, and I say related because marijuana is no longer does not have penalties that would require incarceration.
Fair enough.
So it would be probably maybe marijuana for sale, or marijuana that was in the background of the reason for a fight, or a lot of the standard stuff that you'll see would be mild violence.
Gangs, perhaps? Is that
certainly gangs, and one of the things that we have out there are a lot of different programs, a lot of resources. There's a whole lot of very, very dedicated people out there that straddle the line between social workers and people working in the legal process.
Where do parents fit into this equation?
Well,
not in terms of culpability, but in terms of, like, when you're representing a juvenile, you're also in part representing the parent.
Well, that's one of the it is what makes it much more complicated, because as with adults, you generally, when you're interviewing your client and you're talking to your client, it's not generally with parents around, but they are encouraged. In fact, the whole system is based on. Let me put it this way: there was someone that worked out there, worked in our office for many, many years, Steve Pettit, and he spent probably the last 10 years of his career there at Juvenile. And he told me when I came out there that the best way to think about it, and I actually tell this to parents and kids, is that it's not so much what the kid did to be there, to be in the system. It's what are the background factors. So if we may find a situation where maybe mom and daughter have been, really kind of butting heads for a long time, and they're just not communicating, and it's affecting the school work from the daughter, and mom is distracted and missing work, and those kind of things. And it comes to a head one day when maybe, let's say, daughter pushes mom. Okay. Let's just say it that way, just as an example.
An altercation occurs, there's physicality. Okay.
Right, and mom calls law enforcement, and it comes in through the system, and it gets charged. And really, the fact that there was a push isn't really the issue. And so what would happen is, if in fact it was found to be true, and there's different language too, it's not guilty or not guilty, it's did this event occur or did it not occur?
Interesting.
And was it found true or not true? So those rights for a trial and all that would exist. Let's step over that line for now and just say, let's say it gets to that point where it's found to be true. What happens next, and what happens when the child is on probation, is something we'll talk about in a second.
You're good. Okay. With Scott Murray, Deputy Public Defender for the County of Sonoma. We'll be right back.
So, same time next week?
Well, of course. Put away a few bucks, feel like $1 million. For free tips to help you save, go to Feed the Pig.
We're back with Scott Murray, our returning guest, Deputy Public Defender with Sonoma County, posted at Los Guilicos Juvenile Hall, working with the youth there. In our previous segment, we're talking about how there's a nuance with which you approach your work with juvenile offenders versus the adult offenders you've worked with, and some of that comes down to language, how the events are described. It's not overall punitive, and has a whole different philosophy ultimately, kind of geared toward eventually, hopefully, a kind of rehabilitation. So let's pick up where we left off. You're kind of painting a picture where there's an altercation that gets physical between a mother and daughter, and mom has called the cops, and now we are back in that situation.
Now we're in court.
Okay.
And now after that, it's been determined, however procedurally, whether it was admitted by the child or whether it had gone through a trial,
Right.
which is actually called a jurisdictional hearing. But it's the same thing. It's
Right.
actually exactly like a trial, without a jury though. It's the judge that actually. So it's what they call a court trial. But everything else is the same.
Okay.
Witnesses, same rules of evidence, same standard of reasonable doubt, and all that, which has to be explained, pretty much in detail to the kid before we get in there. But we get to the point where it's already been determined, then the probation department does an exhaustive report to determine the background, to determine exactly what we were talking about a second ago. What were the factors in this child's life that led to this? And as it turns out, we may have a case that's fairly mild like that one. Certainly not mild to the mother and the daughter,
Fair enough, but yeah.
But the event itself wasn't the crime of the century.
Right.
However, there are factors, maybe drug abuse problems with the daughter, maybe drug abuse problems with the mother.
Right.
Maybe there was a breakup in the family and it went very badly, and dad hasn't been there for a long time, and maybe there's been no positive male figure in the house, and so they'll taper, or they'll design the probation
Right.
to go along with the needs of the child, counseling in one way or another, or a different kind of a program for more pro-social activities or things like that. But also there's a probation officer that's kind of looking over their shoulder, making sure.
That's
they're doing
fascinating.
the
I
right
didn't
thing.
realize that they're actually addressing the needs of the juvenile
It's the
specifically.
basis of the whole system.
So the crime, the event, is a sort of invitation then to bring in all these resources of the
Yes,
county
yes.
to look at the
And
bigger picture.
there are quite a few resources too.
Sounds like it, yeah. What's it like at Juvenile Hall? I mean, it's worst case scenario, somebody has to be incarcerated. What is that like for them? What do they see?
If the kids are in the hall itself?
Yeah.
Well, it certainly has the trappings of incarceration.
We're talking like bars and...
Just a lot of cinder blocks.
Okay.
I guess
Yeah.
I suppose would
Which is
be
almost
the way to put
worse.
it.
Yeah.
But there's a
Yeah.
school in there. Kids.
Yeah.
If there are some kids, and there are some that are in there for an extended period of time, nobody really wants them to be in there. The goal is to reunite them, get them back with their family, and make sure that they're working on the things that led there. But there are situations where maybe the child isn't safe at home,
Right.
or there are other factors. Maybe this particular child runs a lot, and so they're out and they're putting themselves in dangerous situations. Sometimes the hall is needed for something like that.
Right.
So there are blocks, so to say, or modules, with
private rooms, or I mean, how does...
some are private, and
Okay.
some have maybe two beds in there.
Depending on the needs of the... Okay.
Right, but there are everybody that works in Juvenile Hall has a lot of training to be able to counsel each and every kid at any given point in time.
Well, that's
so
what
that
I wanted
when
to
they
ask you,
interact,
yeah.
they're actually, it's different than the guards, let's say, in the main adult
Sure.
detention center, who are just strictly there for protection.
Right.
And
But you're saying it's inherently therapeutic, and
It is.
any interaction is ultimately contributing to the
Right.
rehabilitation of the
right,
inmate.
and the kids are encouraged to talk about, hey,
great.
I'm having a little trouble with Joe over here, and
When you're in the this courtroom and you're working with you're the defendant, or you're working with the defendant as their defender or as their attorney, and you've got a prosecuting situation over here, and you've got a judge. Are you guys all working together for the best interest of that kid, or is the prosecutor trying to really work their side of it and make a case?
what I probably shouldn't speak for the prosecutor, but I'll just say in general, everybody in that room is there for the best interest of the kid. However, there are two stages, and the first stage being the more traditional two sides of the table. We're gonna hash this out, and if we need to have a trial, it is adversarial.
Okay.
That's the way it goes. However, everybody's hat sort of changes a little bit after that happens. If in fact the kid has been found to be that it's true that this did happen,
Okay.
then there's much more cooperation between probation, our office, private defense attorneys, although private defense attorneys don't spend as much time there with staff working things out, but there are different programs, and so we'll all actually consult, particularly in the programs that are specialized. There's one for sort of mental health needs,
Right.
That's called the ACT program, that meets on a more regular basis, and kids that have those kind of issues get clinicians that will come to the house, that will be with them, that'll meet them at school, they'll have trained clinicians in mental health helping them throughout the day.
And that's
there's
really
one
proactive.
for
That's great.
gangs.
Yeah.
There's one that's also to try and kind of a gang abatement.
Okay.
The idea being some of these, particularly the younger ones, the 13 and 14-year-old kids that are starting to gravitate into a gang type of a life. You want to try and get those kids, if they're in the system, and put them in a program that works with alternatives to gang life.
Right.
So those kind of things happen on a daily basis, and in the DA and probation and our office and the judge, and we'll often have conversations about, well, Jimmy's doing really well this week. Let's make sure that when he comes into court, we really praise him for all the focus and taking care of his community service hours, and he's being more respectful with his mom. It really gets to that.
It gets down to that.
It gets down to that, because the idea is many times the family is not functioning so well, and some of these, when I say these clinicians in these programs, they'll be come into the home and have team meetings with the family once a week and talk about how can everybody get along a little bit better.
Well, let's get along a little bit better in the next segment here with Scott Murray, the Deputy Public Defender of Sonoma County, working with inmates at Juvenile Hall. So, well, not quite inmates yet.
They're not called inmates. No, they're just kids.
When I was 6, I had one thing on my mind. When I was 6, my days were spent playing basketball every chance I could. When I was 6, my dream was to make it to the NBA. When I was 6, my mom had a stroke.
I'm Paul George, and I want you to learn the signs of a stroke fast. F-A-S-T.
F, face drooping. A, arm weakness. S, speech difficulty. T, time to call 911. Because the sooner they get to the hospital, the sooner they'll get treatment. And that can make a remarkable difference in their recovery.
Protect the ones you love.
Spot a stroke. F-A-S-T. Fast.
We're with Scott Murray, Deputy Public Defender with the County of Sonoma. We're talking about his experience working with our local juvenile hall, and where we left off is sort of walking through the rehabilitative phenomena that you guys try to engender. And it really is, like, I begin to understand, like real personal care, real personal service, down to the specific issues that kid is facing, which is amazing. I didn't realize it was that hands-on.
It's very much so, and I've found that sometimes when I'm visiting with some of my kids that are in the hall, or just when they're in my office, you find out things about the home life or some of the things that are bothering that particular kid just by talking to them, just in an open-ended conversation.
I mean, do you think they relate to you? Because you don't look like a square attorney. You look like a cool dude. And is it?
I don't know about that. I mean, I think everybody has their own approach and their own style.
Yeah.
But I just find it really easy to sit and talk about what do you like to do? What do you do in your spare time? And sometimes nobody asks them those kinds of questions.
Right.
Maybe mom and dad are busy, and they're not really paying attention. And if you say, "Boy, I noticed you're noodling on your paper there. Do you like art?" And I love art. Do you want to see some of my drawings? And it opens a whole avenue. I mean, kids have a very different way of relating, not just to adults, but anybody that they come across, in terms of being able to relate to things that they like.
Right.
And if you're just going to talk to them about the mundane things that they're hearing all the time, you're not going to get very far.
And when you ask them what they like and pry into their own interests, what you're really doing is asking them, giving them the space to define themselves.
Exactly.
You know, to you
Exactly.
in the world and to themselves. Yeah.
And then maybe they've never had that before.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's a big.
And to define themselves separately from the issues that got them where they are
Right.
in that moment. Best case scenario, what does that look like when a kid comes through that system?
There are different, once the case is decided, there are different ways that the court can go in terms of what's the right thing, what's going to be the best interest of the child. There is something called informal probation, which would actually come up before a trial, actually, where it's seen that everything is pretty good with school, and I didn't mention school. School's a huge part of it.
Yeah, right.
And truancy and cutting and not going to school and that sort of thing. Kids have to go to school every day if they're going to be on probation, and they can violate their probation by cutting. So it's a very, very big
No, that's a good point. We always forget that's a huge part of their lives. Yeah.
But so let's say this particular kid's doing pretty well, but they messed up. Maybe they got in a fight. They lost their temper at school, maybe. But otherwise their grades are good. They go to school. They're respectful at home. All those things are working pretty well. Maybe they play a sport. They have good support at home. They might get informal probation, where they just have to be good for 6 months. There's going to be a probation officer they'll come check with them once in a while, and they might have to do a chem test to make sure that they're not smoking marijuana or drinking. But generally, they're left to their own devices because they're generally doing okay. They don't need too much, and after about 6 months or so, it'll be done. It'll be gone.
And
then there's a formal probation where they'll have a little more supervision. It could go a bit longer if they're messing up, and the level of supervision will be higher. There could be a wardship, which means that the court actually has legal custody and can make legal decisions regarding the child, separate from what the parents want. And those are the more serious cases. They can last longer. Kids can be on probation for maybe until they're 22, depending on how well they're doing.
So, worst case scenario, right, where a teen offender has done something really egregious, right? What does that turn into? There
is a juvenile prison.
The
Department of Juvenile Justice. There's a facility out in Stockton, I believe, for the boys, and for the girls, it's down in Ventura. The population there is smaller than it used to be. If I'm remembering my numbers correctly, they used to have, just as little as maybe 3 or 4 years ago, there were several thousand kids, and I think it's now down around 600 or so. I don't know if
for the state.
For the state, yeah.
Wow.
There's been much more of an effort in each local county to try and keep the kids closer to their parents, try not to shuttle them off. Although there are some terrific programs there, it's also a much more often than not, the kids that go there are a little more dangerous.
I was going to say,
a little more violent, a little more. Safety to society is a bigger issue.
And it sounds more inherently punitive than rehabilitative.
Well, but except for the fact that, it's I guess you could call it punitive by the fact that, and it's always a shock to the family and a shock to the kid to be taken away and sent away. Sometimes that happens at something called the probation camp in Forestville, which they get a lot of vocational training for when they turn 18. Sometimes they'll go to a group home or something like that. But if you're going to DJJ, you've had to have committed a particular crime. It has to be something that's particularly violent, or a rape, or some kind of a very serious sexual assault. Things like that will trigger the ability. Now, not everything can end up at juvenile prison, but these certain enumerated crimes can. But there are some of the best programs for sexual offenders, for kids, and that is a really complicated, procedure, because the kids haven't really learned yet about how to relate with those feelings, sexual feelings, and what is love and all that. Sometimes all they're seeing is pornography on a smartphone. Hey, look at this, and they're looking at some of the stuff that's really beyond beyond the beyond. I mean, the worst of the worst. And sometimes that's their idea of, well, that's what love is. That's what sex is.
Right.
See, we're getting inside kids' heads in a lot of ways, and having to deal with things that you never thought you'd have to do, and you generally don't have to do with the adults.
Let me ask you, and we have in our last minute here, you asked to be put on this detail.
I did.
What made you make that decision?
I really relate to kids. As much as people would say, oh my God, I have teenagers, and I had teenagers, and I loved having teenagers, and I like the teenage years, and I don't find it a problem at all. I really, really enjoy working with them. It might be because my kids are now grown and away, but it hasn't been that long since they were around. So I like teenage energy. I like at one point in time, years ago, I thought I was going to be a high school history teacher, and who knows, maybe I will eventually. Maybe I'll finally get there. But I just really like the teenage years. I like the energy. I like the way they, that whole spark and that promise and how it's going to turn out. And when there are kids that are struggling and don't have the not just the resources, but the people around them that connect, really inspire them. I mean, I always had teachers that would, or adults that would really inspire me, and sometimes that doesn't happen for other kids. So, long-winded way of saying, I like teenage kids.
They're lucky to have you. So, Scott Murray, Deputy Public Defender with the County of Sonoma, working at Los Guilicos, and doing a great job, man. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, come back again.
I'll be happy to.